So in this section, what I'll be focusing on is how we can actually make this form user-friendly and also presentable to the users. So the whole of what we have on the screen was actually created with HTML, which is the structure definer. Now, if you look at this form, like I said the other time, you will notice that this form is not presentable. So if somebody gives you money to build a website for him or her, and you present this kind of form, I'm very sure that it will be rejected. Why? Because it's not properly organized. So we are bringing CSS. Remember, I've told us that CSS is a styling language which is used to fine-tune the presentation of the HTML structure or element. Now, before we bring in the CSS, I need to create a CSS file. Remember that I told us we have different ways of communicating CSS to our HTML structure. If you can still remember, I mentioned inline, inline CSS application. I also mentioned the internal and of course, external. So I'm going to use one of the method to style this HTML form. So this is the form we are actually styling. So I would like to go to my CSS, folder. Remember that we have created a CSS folder. So what I'm going to do is to expand it and click on new file. And then let's say I'm naming it style.css, style.css. And then remember that we need to connect the CSS file to the HTML form to enable communication. And to do that, we will simply go to the head section. If you have not forgotten, we come here and type link. And then we will reference the CSS file in the href section. So as soon as I type the slash, it calls out all the directory in my file structure. So from here, I'll go to CSS from CSS, and then I will target the one I want to work with, which is style.css. So with this, I've just linked the CSS file to this form. So by the time I start communicating my CSS here, the HTML elements will be responding. That is the whole idea. Now, before you start styling this form, not just the form, anytime you want to style your HTML structure or content, the best practice prescribed that you should always understand the relationship between the elements, which is called HTML DOM. That is HTML Document Object Modeling. HTML DOM. It is an art of understanding the relationship between your HTML elements. For example, if I come back to the form now, the form here is the what? The parent element. Inside the form, we have this as a child element. Inside the child element, we have every other thing. So you can see I just modeled the HTML structure. So what we are simply saying is that we have a box, the first box, which is the form, which is the form. And then we have inside the form, so this box represents this. Now, inside this box, you have another inner box. So what I'm doing right now, I am conceptualizing, I am visualizing the HTML structure, which is called the DOM, Document Object Modeling. Now, this is the field sets. Now, until you understand this, it will be a kind of difficult for you to relate your CSS, because you need to know whether the element you are selecting in CSS is a parent element or is a child element. And it is when you understand the relationship that you'll be able to what? To communicate that effectively. Am I communicating? So inside this, I have individual box. So this one could represent the legend. The legend. Then I have another box. So we just have individual. So this is just like the div. This is just like the div. So inside the div, you have two elements, the label and then the input. So we can continue like that. So this is the visualization of your HTML. So now this is the parent, the relationship between this element to this. If I start by mentioning this, is grandchild, because this is the direct child to the form, and inside the direct child, you have another child. So from here to here is what? Grandchild relationship. But here to here is what? Parent or child relationship. So we have to understand the structure. So like I said, it will help us to style. So I will style from the top. I am doing away with the body. So let me start from here. My form is not a class element. That is, you did not class it. So how am I going to talk to this form? Because that is the first thing. If I take us back to the front end, you will see that what? The form is currently occupying the entire width. You can see it. Okay, so I may not want this form to take the entire width. I want to reduce it to somewhere here like this. Probably I have another image or another element that will share this same row with it. Now, being a block element, it has taken the entire space. So how do I reduce the width? That is the first thing I am going to communicate from my CSS. So I'll come here and use comment as usual. So styling the form element. So how are we selecting this form element? Remember, I told us that there are three ways at the moment we can use to select HTML element. It's either we select by the tag name, or by the class name, or by ID. Now, like I just showed you, this is the form we are styling. It's not class, neither what? ID. So which means in my CSS, I will simply say form. I'm not going to say dot. I'm not going to say hash, because I am not selecting it with a class name, neither what? ID. I am simply selecting it by its tag name or with its tag name. So I will just open my CSS block. So the first thing I'm going to communicate, I will say what? The maximum width. There is difference between when you say width and when you say maximum width. I'll tell you what that means in a moment. So if I say maximum width, and I say, for example, 700 PS. So maximum width is just like you are setting the total space an element can consume within the available what? Entire space. So if I go to the front end now, you see that what? I have reduced it. So which means that what? According to your instruction, you said this form, you must not use more than 700 PS, though you displayed yourself by default 100%. But now I have limited you to use only the space of what? 700 pixels. Am I communicating? That is the meaning of this. So I can as well achieve this with what? Width. Okay. Now, I'll go down here. I can say, now the margin. Margin. Remember that I have already explained the concept around margin. The word margin is derived as a result of seeing all HTML elements as box model. If I have not explained that, let me quickly illustrate so that each time I use margin, you understand the kind of space I am talking about. For example, I have this element. This could be your H1. This could be your H1. And then I have another element. This could be your IMG. This could be your image element. Now, the space between this element from the outside is called margin. Now, margin has 4 values. Margin has 4 values. If it is not top margin, it will be what? Bottom margin, or right margin, or left margin, which means that if I bring in another element here, I am going to talk about what? Right margin. The space between it and the other element from the right hand side, in as much is outside. Now, if I have another element here, I'm going to talk about what? Left what? Margin. If I have another element here, sorry for my diagram. If I have another element here, I am going to talk about what? Bottom what? Margin. Now here is top. So here is top margin. While here is right margin. While here is bottom margin. Then here is what? Left what? Margin. Now, the space between this right up and the borderline inside, on the inside, and the space between this on the inside, on the inside, on the inside is called padding. We call that padding. So each time I use the word padding, automatically I'm talking about what? Internal space. Talking about internal space between the content in a box and the lines around it. Then each time I talk about margin, I'm talking about the entire content, the space between it and the next one around it, either to the left, to the right, top, or bottom. Now you understand the concept of margin. Let's proceed so that each time I use margin, I'm talking about external space. Each time I use padding, I'm talking about what? Internal space. I hope that is clear. Did you get it? All right. So now if I say margin, without saying margin top, margin left, it means I'm talking to the whole 4 side. And if I say 20 PS and I say auto, I say auto. Now, it means this value represents left and right, while this value represents top and bottom. Did you get that? Instead of having 4 value, you use only 2 value, which means that you are representing left and right with 20, and you are representing top and bottom with auto. That is, the browser should calculate it by itself automatically. That is what you say. Now, if I go back to the front end, you see what we just achieved. Now, if I want to know, as a beginner, what I am advised to do is to observe before the application of the property. Now, let me go there temporarily and say, comment it out. And then I go back to the front end. Look at where it is before the margin. Now, let me go back and activate the margin. activate the margin, and then I click. Did you notice the difference? You see that it's moved to the center, right? Good. That was what the auto did. That auto means what? Take it to the middle horizontally. So that is margin. Then I also want some space between all this. So I will now come here. I am still talking to the form. I'll come here and say padding. I'll say padding, padding. So if I just say 20 PS padding, what it means is that what the first side should create equal internal space of 20 what percent. Here I call this and this, but here I'm using only one. Each time you call margin and you assign only one value. Each time you call padding and you assign only one value, indirectly you are speaking to the first side. That is what it means. Okay? Now, if I go back to the front end, you see the difference. There's space here. Do you notice the difference? Hope you are getting it, sir. Hope you are with me.
I'm getting you.
All right. So now the next thing is that I want to assign handwriting, the fonts. Now, before that, let's look at always take note of before and after so that you'll be able to know, oh, this is what this property is doing part time. Now, pay attention to the handwriting. So if I come here and I say font family, which is used, which is a CSS property for transforming the handwriting. Now, why it is called family, it means you can combine two or more what fonts to form what an appearance. That is why it's called font family. So I will select the number of fonts. I can say, okay, I want area, and Helvetica, and what sans serif. So I can have combined two, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 3 rather. I can say, okay, only 2. So if I go back to the front end, you see that what the handwriting have changed. Now, you created this content that changed their handwriting, not with the form, but you created them with what? The form element. Why did they not change? You have not spoken to few sets. You have not spoken to legend that created this. You have not spoken to Libe that created this, but it changed as you spoke to the form because it's a parent. So what we are saying is that what any property inside the form, until you assign properties to them individually, they should continue inheriting their parent appearance. Because here you assign this to the form and all the properties inside it that are designed to consume this are affected. Are you with me?
I'm getting you.
All right. So, and mind you, all these things are not fixed. So don't go and think that you must cram all of them. No, your own here can be 800. Your own here can be 30. Your own here can be 15. It's not fixed. It depends on how you want it. Okay? So there's no point of you cramming. Just understand it that all this value can vary depending on how you want your design to come out with. Now, we have finished talking to that. So I want to talk to the global selector. So I'll use a comment to explain each of them. So now, styling the, styling the main body with global selector. So just give me 1 minute. All right, so I hope you are still with me. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. There is what we call global selector. Now, if you look at the appearance of this form, if I select anytime you see CSS code where instead of calling a valid element like H1, or using a class, and someone just use this asterisk and this is global selector, which means that you are talking to the very first the first element in the body of the browser. So for example, all these elements has browser default calculation. Until you speak to them, they will implement the browser calculation. So the way of stopping the browser from assigning its own calculation, you say, in this case, I will say what? Margin. I will say 0. So if I come back to the site now, and I also say what? Padding, and I say what? 0. So which means that the space between the body and the space between the body and the body of the browser is what you are talking to. But why is not making any impact? Because we have already what? Added margin to the form. And that is why, if we have not spoken to the form, you will have seen that as we added 0 now, this line will have been touching this line, and this one will have been touching this edge. So there will not be any space remaining. But because we might be targeting mobile display, because when you are building your website, you don't build it for laptop standard. Statistics have shown that out of people that use this website, 90% use their phone, right? Only few persons uses their laptop. So you as a developer, when you are developing, you don't prioritize laptop users. You prioritize what? Mobile users. So which means that your concept, your thinking should be, how will this website display on phone, not how will this website display on laptop. Laptop has been taken care of from here, the way it's going to display. Let me show you. You see the whole of this line has taken care of how this website will display on laptop. So you don't need to bother yourself about laptop. Just focus on mobile, okay? Because this line is responsive. This is what determines how the entire content within your website are displayed on a laptop. So now going back here, the next element I want to talk to is the view set. Remember that it is the view set that created this grouping what? Effect. And when I was coding the HTML structure, I told you that the view set is used to group all the form elements, if you can still remember, right? That was what generated this line that is enclosing everything. So I want to speak to it because I've spoken to the form. Look at the way I am going. I've spoken to the form. Let me go to the HTML so that I'll show you that I'm actually applying a kind of hierarchy in talking to them. I've spoken to this. Now I want to speak to this. I'm coming from the top. There is no order. It's your choice. You can style this first before you start. In fact, you can style this one first before you even style it. But best practice, the way I usually go about it is that I start from the top. It's not compulsory, depending on how you want it. So now I'll go back there and say, okay, now I want to talk to the view set. Then I'll ask myself, how am I going to select the view set? Is it a class element or ID, or I'm going to use it name? So I'll go back to the HTML and check. It's not class. So I'm going to call it what? Just view set. I'll come here and say what? View styling. The view sets elements. So I'll come here and say view sets, CSS block. So what do I want? The border line. I want to work on that. Remember, I must have used this property before. The thickness of the line, let's say the type of the line, let's say solid. And then if possible, I'm using hexadecimal method to reference my color, which is what? Hash, then with a combination of letters or number, that will generate color. It's just like what we achieve with RGBA. So if I do C, will give me a color, and that's the color. So if I go back to the front end, you see that what we have changed this color a little. It's no longer sharp the way it was. Now, I am still on it. I want to add some padding. I want to add some padding. I will say, okay, give me internal space all around. I'll just say what this. So if you check, you can see that there's space here now. You can see there's space here. There's space here. Now, like I advised you the other time, the best practice is before you apply a property, in case you are learning on your own, and you want to know the actual effects of or the contribution of a CSS property, this is what you do. Now, you go back there, you say, before you apply this, you take note of the appearance. Now, if I go back now, check what I have, you can see that what? No space here at all. Now, after you have applied it, you check again. That is how you know what individual properties are doing. You can see it now. Now, I have space. Now, there is a target. The target is we are looking at a situation where we give the users of this site, the visitors of this site, good experience. Because we are UI and what? US designer. We are building web application with an interface. That's why we are conscious of arranging things properly so that when somebody visits this website, the person will not want to leave. The person will want to stay here. That is the motive. You must strive to make sure that you give that experience, that impression. Now, the next thing is that I want to add some corners, some curve to the corners of the line. So I will say border radius. So border radius is to curve the edges. So I'll say, okay, border radius of 8 PS is enough. So if I come back here, you can see that what? I have curve here, I have curve here, I have curve here, and the form is looking more professional gradually. Now, the next one is the background. I want to give the form a background. So I will just say what? Background. Then I'm also using the hexadecimal method, but this time around, I will use 3 different letters. So it is not white, but it's almost white. So before you will see the background effect is when the whole of this page has background. For example, if I could just go back to, if I can just say body, if I can just say body, just for us to be able to see that background color that we gave now. If I say background color, let me just say black. So if I come back to the front end, you can see that what? There is white what? Background color. So let me comment it out for now because I don't really need it at the moment. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to talk to the legend. The legend is this text. Remember, few set created this line, and the legend gave us this description. So how do I speak to that legend? The same thing, I'll come here, I'll say what? Styling the legend. So the same thing, I'll come here and say the legend, let me go and check if it was class or not. It wasn't class, so I will just call it by its tag name. So I'll simply say legend. I'll simply say legend, and then I'll say, okay, the font size, I'm using another unit, which is called rem, just like the way you have pixel inches. So it's another unit. So if I go to the front end and check, you can see that I've increased it a little. Now, I can say, okay, I want to make it a little bit thicker. So I will say font weight, or you can as well say font style, bold, or you use font weight, and then you can use bold or bolder. So if I check now, you can see that what is thicker than the rest. So all this is to enhance visibility and readability. Okay, so I just want to make sure that everything is properly eye catching. So the next one is I want to add some padding.
Okay, stop
The
it.
padding, adding some padding. I'm having a 0. That is what? The left hand side and the right 0. Then the top and the bottom are 10 PS. So if I go back to the front end and check, okay, so I've added some padding. You can see that it's no longer touching the line. Now I want to also define the color. The color of this, I'm also using hexadecimal method. So I will start with hash. This time around, I will use 33. That will give me a color. If I come back, you can see that the color have a little bit drop from the full black. So now I want to talk to the form div, form rows, because we are creating a kind of responsive form. For example, what are the way you check? How do you check your element responsiveness? You right click on it and then you go to inspect. And then when you inspect, you will see how this form will display on different devices. You click on this icon that say what? Toggle devices to well. If I click here, this is how this form will display on what? Samsung Galaxy. So if I click here now, I want to check how this form will display on iPhone 12 Pro. This is it. So you check whether this line is what? Contrasting, or is a part of it is removing. That is how you know that the form is responsive. If I click here, you can see that to an extent, the form is reacting well. Okay, so now I can click here to go back to my browser view. Now, just want you to know how to preview how your website, your components will be responsive. So here, there is a concept here, and I will explain. Form rows. Looking at form rows. Now here, the first thing I want to do is form. I will check if I have this structure there. I will check it now if I have this structure there. Form row, if I don't have it, then. So let's go to the HTML structure and check. Yeah, okay, form row, that is, we have div. So we are talking to what? To all the div that are enveloping label and input. So if I come back here and say form div, and I say display, that is, I want them to be vertical, display flex, and then I come back here, you see that the appearance have changed a little. So it's actually a plan to achieve responsiveness. Now, the next one is flex direction. So the idea is that I'm using all these CSS property indirectly to expose you to them. Like I said, it's not compulsory, but I'm deliberately using them so that you know, oh, there is a CSS core border radius. Oh, there is a CSS core border. So this is the best way we can teach you the CSS property, where we are applying them and you are getting results, than just to be defining them without application. So if I say direction, I want it to display column. So I'll select this. Then if I go back there, you see what happened now? You see the way everything spaced out just by adding what? That column, and the form is looking professional. Can you see it? So like I advise you, always know before and after. So if I want to know what exactly it contributed, I will temporarily comment it out and then go back to the front end. You can see how it looked like without the direction. So now if I go back and bring it back and then check again, I will know, wow, so it's actually making impact. Now, the next thing is I want to set some margin. I want to set some margin, and only at the bottom, not all side. If we were to be all side, I would have used margin. But in as much I say margin bottom, that means what? I just want it to affect one particular as. So I will say, okay, give me margin of what? 15 PS. So like I just advised you now, I want to know what this one contributed. Let me check. Now, you just take note of what you have. Now let me go back there and temporarily comment it out and check again. So on your own, when you are practicing, this is how you check some of these things. You can see that what this middle name is too close to the input. This last name is too close to this input. Now, by the time I bring in the margin now, and I check again, you can see that what between this element, there is reasonable space. Between this and this element, remember that it is div. Remember, we are talking to the div, and each of the div is holding label and input. So that margin is not for only this, not for only, it's for what? The two things inside one div and the other things inside another div. That's why you are having the space created here, created here, created here, not between the input and the label. So I just want you to, because look at the way I selected it, form div, which means that in CSS, this is called CSS combinator, or this is where you are using parent to select a child. This div is a child inside form. So the actual element you are talking to is not the form, it's what? The div. So you only use this form to recognize the div you want to talk to. Am I communicating? All right, so the next thing is the label. Remember that what? The labels are this middle name, last name, date. They are the labels. So I want to fine-tune them a little. So I will say styling the label. Styling the label. So from here, I'll simply say, I'll go back to my HTML structure and check whether it's a class element. No, it's not class. So I'll just go back and say what? Label. And then just call it. So the first thing is fonts. Font weight, I want to make them thicker a little. So I can just say what? Bold. The next one is margin bottom. I want some space at the bottom. And then I could just say 5 PS. If I go back to the front end, you can see that what? They are bolder and there's little space between them and the input. Little space between them and the input. That is exactly what we are. Your own can say 10. All these values are subjected to changes if you want. So color of the label, I want to also use hexadecimal. So I could just say 444. Now, okay, so if I come back, I see that you can see that I have dimmed the color. It's no longer sharp or full black because I'm trying to blend it with the color of this. Okay, you're trying to be unique or uniform. Now, the next thing is the input. What are the input? The input are these boxes. I want to also fine-tune them. I want to make them look more presentable. Now, but there is a Are you still here? Are you still here? Are you still here? Hello? Okay, so now I want us to talk to the input.
Yeah.
Now, the input are these boxes. Now,
Yeah.
if you look at this, if you look at this input, let's go back to the HTML. Always go back to the HTML to understand what you want to talk to. These are the input. There are places where we say type text. There are places where we say type text. Here, type text. Here, type date. Here, type radio. The same tag, but generating or producing different types of data or collecting different type of data from the user. So if you go to your HTML now, if you go to your CSS and you do something like this, if you come here and just say input, it's going to talk to all of them. For example, if I come here styling